Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, what is up, and welcome to the Critical Podcast, the only podcast that happens one time a year and exclusively one time a year. Got my brother James with me here once again,
What's
or
up?
maybe for the first time, depending on how I release these. This time, we are going to be looking at our top 10 movies of the year. First impressions overall from you, or overall impressions of this year, movie-wise.
Movie-wise, yeah, this year was pretty freaking strong. I don't know if it was quite as strong as 2022. 2022 had some bangers, but still, I don't know. I don't like to say one year is stronger than the other, and there's still so many great movies. I still got two in my list that I would consider to be flawless 5 out of 5s. So, yeah, a lot of iconic directors coming out with movies this year, so this was sort of a big year for movies. Also a sort of rough year for movies with the strike that happened, but at least they're starting to get their fair share, which is great. But yeah, overall, I had very positive feelings about the movies this year.
Yeah, I think one of the best things about this year, I think this year was another really surprisingly strong year for horror. You know, that's always been my favorite genre pretty much since I was introduced to it. I think this was another pretty strong year for horror as a whole.
I've only got one horror movie in my top 10.
I think I have two, but there were some fun ones. You know, I don't know. It's just, yeah. Anyways, we're gonna get right into it. The way this works, we're just gonna say our number 10s each, and it just goes down and down until number 1. It's pretty simple, straightforward. So here we go. My number 10 movie is a director who hasn't really done a lot, but I think this movie, usually my number 10 movie, has historically been one that is very fun and I just have fun with, and this one is no different. And this one is Thanksgiving. Now, we saw this movie fairly recently. Came out in November. Quite fitting. No surprises there. I think me and James both came out with the same feeling of this movie, that like it is horrifically disgusting. I just have to be quite upfront about that. It is horrifically disgusting.
Yeah, it is.
Your eyes will not be the same after seeing it. This is Eli Roth, of course, who did Hostel. If you've seen Hostel, you would understand.
And The Hills That Have Eyes.
And The Hills That Have Eyes, yes. I honestly looked that up, and I completely forgot he did that movie. But this movie starts with a really, really fun opening sequence that almost feels like a zombie apocalypse. I'm going to give overarching spoiler warnings to this podcast, because we are working off of the knowledge that we have seen all these movies. If you have not seen the movie that we say, mute and maybe go on to the next one, or just not watch the podcast and go watch the movie yourself. Up to you. But I love this movie. This across the board, really fun performances, a really impressive like usage of its theme, a very disturbing usage of its theme as well in certain spots. I just loved all the performances. It kind of flips around with its own plot twists. I think one of the things that I said after the movie was I loved how it made you think there were going to be so many different plot twists, and then it's not that. So it just plays around with this fun idea of plot twists, and it really never does any of them, and it's kind of funny for that. But like I said, I really love that opening sequence. That's sort of like a zombie apocalypse, but it's just people shopping on Black Friday. But you know, that's just the way it is.
Yep.
It's a really fun movie, and it's a surprisingly well put together slasher flick as well. On top of that, so yeah, overall very, very fun movie.
Okay, at number 10 for me is maybe the most bizarre but also most compelling one of the most compelling movies I saw this year, but that's sort of par for the course for this director. It's Beau is Afraid, directed by Ari Aster, who is a very controversial director, to say the least.
I don't think there's a single director that me and James have a singular opposite opinion on aside from this guy.
Have you seen this movie?
I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't.
Well, I will say, I mean, this might be my favorite of his. And I don't know. I mean, Joaquin Phoenix his performance in this is really good. I might like his performance in this better than Joker. I'm going to be honest. Um, he plays the character he plays there is so just bizarre. Like he's sort of a man-child, but I don't mean that in an insulting way. Like, he has the mentality of a child in the movie. Like, he plays very innocent. It almost reminds me of, like, a modern retelling of Homer's Odyssey in a way, because he, like, goes on this very long journey of self-discovery throughout the movie.
Oh, yes. Journey equals the Odyssey. Classic.
Yeah.
I'm just trolling.
It's weird because the basic outline of the movie is that he's going home to his mom, who he has a very complicated relationship with, and I think she's part of the reason why he has like this infant mentality, because she sort of treated him as such. But he later on on this journey, he finds out that his mom has died, and so he's essentially going on a journey to go to her funeral. But the movie is sort of commenting on his complicated feelings with his mother and the relationship that was going on there. Well, I don't know. It's hard to describe this movie because there's so much that happens in it. The beginning 20 minutes of the movie is particularly great, where they're just showing how anxious he is about everything. Like, it's an anxiety trip for the first 20 minutes, where he lives in this horrible part of town, although you could debate that it's just how he sees things. Like, there's some things that happen here that clearly aren't actually happening. Like, there's a part where like a cop is literally running naked around the street, which is obviously not happening, but in his view is. And it's just like him having anxiety about everything that possibly could go wrong, going wrong, and it's amplified to infinity. And it's sort of funny, but it's also sort of sad to watch, because you just sort of feel for him. And yeah, this movie is wild. There's one part of this movie that I'm sure probably pissed some people off, because it seemed like it was playing out his literal life story, but it was revealed that it was just a play happening on stage that he was watching from the audience. Like, he was watching his life story play out right in front of him. And it was so weird, but I found it to be so interesting. Yeah. And there's also this stuff with his complicated relationship with his father. And when they reveal who his father is, it is so weird. It is one of the weirdest things I've seen. I don't want to reveal it because it's so weird, but it's sort of like the most obvious metaphor that it becomes ironically clever with how obvious the symbolism is. I don't know. Ari Aster is such a weird dude. I don't know where he gets these ideas, but I was very compelled by this movie, and yeah, I liked it.
Fair enough. I can't stand that guy. Nothing against him personally, but I can't stand his movies. Okay, my number 9 movie is A Haunting in Venice.
Oh, really?
Listen, I love this movie. I loved this movie, and the more that I thought about it, I loved it more. This was one of the more surprising in my top 10. It's probably the most surprising in my top 10. I don't usually have detective mysteries in my top 10s at all. But I think this movie combined everything that we love about the Agatha Christie movie adaptations that have been happening so far. The first 2 were just kind of okay. They were well told detective mysteries, but they didn't really do anything special. Yeah. This one does something very special that detective mysteries don't do, and that it is not necessary. It's not fully a mystery. It takes a spin to horror as well, which is really fun for a detective mystery, I think. And this is honestly Kenneth Branagh's one of my favorite, if not my favorite, performance from Kenneth Branagh. This guy has just so impressed me over the past few years. Has a really, really strong supporting cast as well. Tina Fey obviously always going to be a fun watch. All the supporting cast of The Family, and the setting is really cool. This and I gotta say this as someone who, you know, who works with cameras, who loves film. Some of the shots in this film are just so cool. I just think of a certain shot where a certain character gets impaled by the hand of a statue, but all it shows is like the shadow, and there are so many cool cinematic moments, and the movie does this weird thing that I think we talked about, where almost every shot where people are talking in dialogue, the person's face is on the opposite side of the camera that they should be. The film consistently builds this weird, like, unsettling feeling from the way it angles the cameras to the way the characters sort of interact and stuff like that. The more I thought about it, the more I just really appreciate what risks this film took for being a detective story at its core. It really took that and upped it to the next level, added some scary elements to it. And while at its core it still ended up being a detective film, it was really fun to see some horror elements added to a detective thing. I feel like that should be done more, but this film just like I don't know, the more I thought about it, the more I just loved it more and more. It's just one of my favorite detective films in general, probably.
Okay. At number 9 for me is Past Lives. This is a movie about two childhood friends from South Korea. They were they had this like childhood like love for each other when they were children living together in South Korea. But the girl, whose name is Nora, she moves to America and leaves the boy named Hae Sung in South Korea, and essentially they don't talk for a long time. But then they reconnect again in college through online chat, and there's this implication that there could still be something between them, but it never really pans out in college time either, because realistically they're still very far apart, and yeah, they are living different lives. And then, but the main part of the movie focuses on them as adults, where Nora is married to someone else, but he comes to America essentially to reconnect with her because he's still convinced that they might have a chance at a relationship. Like, he's been in love with her his whole life, basically. And he's sort of this hopeless romantic who is very idealistic about relationships. And so the movie is about them reconnecting, and it has a very compelling idea in this idea of essentially the title of the movie, that maybe in a different type of life they would have fallen in love with one another if circumstances had played out differently, but now they're so different from each other, they have such different lives that it's just not possible. Like, she's still going to be married. The movie doesn't end like in an ideal rom-com way where they get together or whatever, and I like that it doesn't like play the husband out as like a villain. In fact, he's very gracious. He is happy for them to reconnect and everything and hang out, and she still ends up with him at the end of the movie. So it's very realistic in that regard, and I think it treats the relationship very realistically. And the ending is still bittersweet. Like, she still feels this connection to him, and it's just a very effective movie, I think, in what it does. I think it really works well in establishing its ideas, and I think it's very compelling. Performances are great across the board. Greta Lee plays the main character. She is excellent in this. I think she plays it very well. I don't know if she'll get nominated for an Oscar, but I think she should. This movie's sort of gone underrated, but I have a feeling she could have a chance. And Tou, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm sorry if I'm not, but he's also great. And as her sort of love interest, past love interest, Hae Sung, their chemistry is impeccable in this movie. They work very well off each other. Well-directed movie as well. I think it's very well paced. Very fun to follow. Just a great movie all around.
Yeah, I remember a lot of people raving about that. That was like a time that people were raving about that.
Yeah.
All right. My number 8, in the list of things that will usually make my top 10s if they are good, one of them will always be new IPs. I love new IPs. I love supporting new IPs, and this one was no different. I think I probably loved this movie way more than James did, potentially. I'm not sure about that, but my number 8 is The Creator. My love for sci-fi, first and foremost, always sort of leans me towards sci-fi anyways. This movie is a completely original IP from Gareth Edwards, who did Rogue One most famously. He and he also did Godzilla 2014. Wow.
Yeah.
Um, this is a movie that's sort of set in a very futuristic version of America. It has the very atypical, or very typical rather, sci-fi story about finding the person who's gonna save everybody. And the person who saves everybody is supposed to save everybody as a child. It's got a very predictable plot by all standards, but the movie is put together very, very well. John David Washington single-handedly carries the movie with his performance. I was really impressed with him for the fact that he was sort of just playing a standard soldier who's just sort of going about his orders. He ends up finding this. He's supposed to take out this child. By take out, I mean kill. But he ends up
an AI.
because the child. And this film is obviously extremely well placed in the modern age by talking about AI and how some people side with them, some people hate them. This has become a very common thing, but it's really relevant this year. It feels like Gareth Edwards was sort of slapping a lot of the studios who were talking about AI in the face, but I digress. Its message is its message is very on the nose. So if you don't get it, I don't know how you didn't get it, but really strong movie with like a lot of really good performances. Like I said, John David Washington single-handedly definitely carries the movie. The kid actor, who I don't remember his name, he did pretty dang solid as the child as well. Overall, the movie definitely has one of those Gareth Edwards endings. Apparently, he really likes everybody dying at the end of his movies, or like someone important dying at the end of his movies. But overall, I think the strength, everyone said, and I agree, that this movie's strongest strength is the visuals. Across the board, one of the most impressive looking movies. And I found out it was shot with I believe it's a Sony X3, something like that, a very inexpensive camera, and it looks as good as that. Like, this movie was made on a pretty small budget, like $80 million, I think. And I don't remember if it made it back. I hope it did, because I think this could be a really strong potential for a good IP that can only get better. Like, this movie was very ground level. I feel like there could be so much more interesting, like, storytelling to be done with a world that's inhabited by AI that's like sort of under the, like, a lot of movies put their AI like above everybody else. This one puts AI at the lowest level possible. It's just like they're either forced to help the government, or they're living impoverished with a lot of other humans, and then there's like sort of half human, half AI people and stuff like that. It's a very interesting concept that I'd really like to see explored more. Overall, this movie was a really solid foundation, and I hope it's built upon more.
Yeah. Okay. At number 8 for me is a movie that was pretty high for me all year long, but like I say a lot of times with these top 10s, the fact that this movie is low speaks to the strength of the rest of the top 10, in my opinion, and that is Skinamarink. I was really intrigued by this movie from the first trailer I saw of it. It looked like it would be a pretty interesting spin on the horror genre that hadn't been done before, and that's essentially what it was. I've never really seen a horror movie done like this before. I suppose you could call it found footage in a way, but not really. It more plays like a home video that a child would make.
I would call it home video, yeah, for sure.
And the director, Kyle Edward Ball, he creates the film from a child's perspective, so there's a lot of very unconventional camera angles, because it's like how a child would hold the camera, and it's a very simple premise. Like, these children are in their home, their father's missing, and bizarre things are happening in the house. Like, windows are disappearing, doors are going out of sight that were there before, and their mother is acting very strange, to say the least.
Very strange.
Yeah. This movie, this is one of those movies where I think you have to be in the right setting to watch it. I don't say that for every movie, but this
You
one,
have to be very brave.
you have for this one, you have to be at home with the lights off and no distractions. I actually don't think you should watch this one in a movie theater because it is home video by definition, in my opinion, so it works perfectly in that setting. And when you're in that setting, like, it is so unsettling. Like, I felt legitimately unsettled in this movie, and there isn't even that much gore, and the imagery, a lot of the imagery and stuff that happens is sort of implied. But, like, when the gore happens, like, there's this scene where one of the kids gets hurt, and just you see blood splatter across the kitchen, and it is so unsettling. Like, it sends chills. And I think it's just the fact that it's happening to a kid and it feels very real. Like, the kid's cry feels very visceral. And I think I've watched some analysis videos of this movie. It's very interesting. A lot of the analyses seem to agree that the children are being abused by their parents, is the implication going on here, to the point that they're being violently hit. And the abuse, and for the mother at least, she mentally loses herself. It becomes a lot more violent. Like, she very heavily injures the boy, I think it is, right? And it's heartbreaking to watch, but also horrifying. And man, there's so many creepy moments in here. There's a moment with a toy phone that works so freaking well.
Stop, I just got chills.
And then I really loved the part of the movie where the house sort of almost becomes like a toy house. Like, the children are trying to contextualize their trauma by making it all feel like pretend. There's just so many things here. It works so well, and the fact that it's not all clear really works because it is from the perspective of a child. I think everything about this movie is great, and it's such a unique horror experience.
Now we're going to go from exceptional in-depth examination to simplicity at its finest. My number 7 movie is Evil Dead Rise. I love Evil Dead. But this movie, there's something exceptionally unique about what Evil Dead does and how it does it. This movie has a really cool opening sequence, really cool title card sequence in particular. I'm sure most people have seen it because it went super viral. But this movie has one of the... It's a very structurally simple movie, but it does a lot of stuff really cool. Obviously, Evil Dead at its core, Necronomicon, all that type of stuff. Read it. It releases a random demon into your house, and then that demon infects everyone. There's obviously Evil Dead is kind of known for its slight comedic take on horror as well. There's a lot of kind of funny, but also you don't know why you're laughing because it's disgusting. The like what you'd call final form creature, I won't spoil it because it's pretty, but the final form creature is so disgusting you almost want to laugh at it, and the ending sequence is just so unbelievably gory, but it's very satisfying. And Evil Dead is just one of those fun popcorn flicks, but it also had some really solid performances across the board, and some really fun visuals that I'm sure the VFX people had a blast with. So a very fun movie, and got a pretty strong 4 out of 5 for me.
Yeah. Okay. At number 7 for me is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Probably my favorite Guardians movie, I'm going to have to say. Now, I think it's pretty much a consensus among people that Marvel has effectively fallen off. I mean, Disney has even sort of taken a step back and realized, oh, we need to do something about Marvel or it's going to be over, essentially. I don't know if they can really salvage the mess that they've created with the multiverse stuff. I think, as much as I still like Spider-Man Far From Home, I think that movie did more damage than good because of the multiverse stuff.
I don't think it really aged well.
All the stuff that came after it, I think a lot of it was a great mistake and is reducing the effectiveness of the early Marvel movies. Well, I say by that I mean like they're talking about bringing characters back. That's neither here nor there. But the point is, the best Marvel movies are done by people who actually know what they're doing, and James Gunn is one of those people. He is just a good director. I'm glad he's sort of taking the helms of DC. I think he'll actually do something good with it. And yeah, I think he nails it once again here. I like all the Guardians movies. They're among the best in the Marvel canon still. And the fact that this one still did well despite how disastrous this phase of Marvel has been, it speaks to how strong James Gunn is as a director and how confident he is in making these movies. I think probably the most impressive thing about this movie is how it handles something that James Gunn didn't even write, which is like Gamora dying. Like, he handles it so well. The idea that this new Gamora, Peter Quill is not going to fall, she's not going to fall for Peter Quill because she's not the same Gamora. And I think he handles that really well, while also throwing some subtle dishes at Marvel because he's clearly pretty upset about what they did with Gamora, and I can't entirely blame him because he clearly had a goal for where he was going to take her character. But nevertheless, I think he handles that really well. But, I mean, the obvious highlight here, and it's going to be the one that everyone says, is the story of Rocket. Rocket has not really been my favorite in the first two Marvels. I like him fine, but the rest of the characters have always been more interesting to me. But, oh, man, the story they tell with him is so well done here. And it's really told in a very mature way, and it's never treated as a joke, which is something that Marvel does so often with characters with traumatic baggage. Like, they try to make it so jokey, but this movie does not do that, and it works very well. And just the relationship he has with the other animal characters and what happens to them, it all works very well. And it was actually pretty cool to see Marvel actually nail a horror vibe for once. Like, with that story, it actually feels more unsettling than the Doctor Strange movie, which was supposed to be horror, but was really not. But nevertheless, I really liked that part of the movie, and I think it was emotionally very resonant. The music is still great. He nails the musical needle drops and makes them feel earned. Well done. It's very compelling from front to back. The villain is pretty awesome in this one. I think he's very unsettling. And yeah, I do think this is the best Guardians movie.
Yeah. Well, after that extremely detailed analysis, I'm happy to say my number 6 is also Guardians of the Galaxy Chapter 3, Volume 3, whatever you want to call it. Volume 3. I put Chapter 3 for some reason, but it's all volumes. But yeah, I don't have a lot to add to what James said. Obviously, the story here, the performances from all the cast, just really exceptionally well done performances. I gotta highlight Bradley Cooper's voice performance for Rocket. He absolutely, like, Rocket was such a character that was sort of in the background, but James Gunn always said, like, oh, he's been the main character the whole time. And so, well, I don't know about that, but he really gets the spotlight here, and it's a really well told story. Bradley Cooper knocked it out of the park. And there's a lot of fun in here too. I think Will Poulter getting a funny character is kind of humorous. He has some really funny moments as well. A great villain, really heartwarming, but also very, very disturbing story about that sort of half touches on animal abuse to a certain extent. Is very well put together, very well done. So I don't have a lot to add to that. James pretty much nailed everything else that I was going to say about it. So yeah.
At number 6 is one of my more recent watches. It's a movie called The Holdovers.
Oh, I heard of this.
It's actually more of a Christmas movie. But I think it's just a good movie in general, and it might be one of my favorite movies surrounding Christmas that I've seen in recent memory. And this movie sort of had a cheat code in it because it's about a relationship between a teacher and a student, and as a teacher, that's going to resonate with me a lot. And I think the movie is just really heartfelt in how it develops this relationship. The teacher in this, he's sort of a classic hardline teacher who's very bitter and not the students don't like him because he's so strict, and he doesn't really seem to have good relationships with many people in his life. He's not married or anything like that. But over a Christmas break, he teaches at a boarding school, essentially, and the students go home for Christmas. But he's in charge of watching students who don't get to go home for Christmas. And obviously, those students have their own baggage because they don't get to go home for Christmas, so there's clearly something going on. And there's a couple students that he stays behind to watch, but eventually all of them get to leave except for one. And this one student is a sort of bitter like him, but a younger version of him. And his parents essentially have made him stay because his mom is marrying a new person, and she wants to have a honeymoon with him. And it's sort of a sad situation because obviously, like, you want to spend time with your loved ones at Christmas, but she views her new husband as more important than her son. So it's a very sad situation, and you can understand why the boy is so bitter and everything. And the story is essentially about him and this teacher forming this relationship and coming to understand one another, and understand why each other is so bitter, and ultimately become better people in the process. Both of them become better people. And there's also another character in this named Mary, who is such a good character. She's going through her own stuff. She's the cafeteria she cooked for the school. She's lost her son to. Her son was in the military, and he was lost in combat, so she's dealing with the loss of her son. So it's essentially like these three misfits who are dealing with a lot of stuff coming together and sort of bonding with one another. Sort of that classic trope, but done very, very well. Paul Giamatti plays the main character, and he is superb in this. He plays his character so well, and this movie is also very funny. There's some very funny moments in this movie that work very well with how the characters work off each other. There's a new actor in here who I've never seen, and lots of people have been buzzing about him, named Dominic Sessa, and he plays the student. He is so good in this, and I can't wait to see what he does next. And Divine Joy Rudolph plays the mother who is going through grief, and she is excellent in this. I think she'll probably get an Oscar nomination for her role, and for my money, I sort of hope she wins. I think she does very well in this role. And yeah, this movie was it was a very pleasant watch. I really liked it, and I could see myself returning to this every Christmas.
Okay, my number 5 is John Wick Chapter 4. We went on a super binge of John Wick earlier this year because I'd never seen any of them. I would still say I just feel like each one of them improved on itself. Like up until the third one was my favorite. And then this one came out, and this one's my favorite now. This movie does it. I can't even start at how freaking incredible of an action movie this is. At its core, this movie does some of the most unique things an action movie has ever done. I think most people have seen the famous top-down, almost isometric view sequence where John Wick is using a fire shotgun and blasts his way through the house. That has got to be one of the coolest things I've ever seen done in a movie. I think that was just so awesome. I don't know how they did that, but I'd love to know. That was just so freaking cool. And then obviously the tone of the movie, it takes a bit more of a personal tone. It has more of a it has more of a singular villain to it. Bill Skarsgård obviously plays an incredible villain role. He is just pretty much cemented himself as one of my favorite villain typecasts recently. And obviously Keanu Reeves always knocks it out of the park. He's the perfect John Wick. Some really fun one-shot sequences. One on the staircase that I can think of that was a one-shot that was very well done. Probably the biggest surprise was Donnie Yen, who played Kane. He's like a blind man who is also one of the assassins, but he was like a really like surprising part of it, that like he put on really good performance, and a lot of people figured he might take up the mantle of John Wick, but you never know. And obviously, you know, some highlight performances. Ian McShane has another solid performance as Winston. Got to shout out Lance Reddick as Charon. Obviously, incredibly difficult loss. He's one of the best actors. You know, I knew him from video games first, but as he has been in so many movies, he will be greatly missed. But this movie was just an incredible action movie. Definitely my favorite John Wick movie. And possibly in my like top 3 action movies ever. So yeah.
My number 5 is also John Wick Chapter 4.
We did it again.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the only time we'll be doing
I don't really have too much to add. I agree with pretty much everything that Joseph said. Yeah, I think this is an excellent action movie. I also do think this is probably the best John Wick, although I have a great affection for the first John Wick. This one, I mean, what's been really cool about the movies is how they've each expanded the lore, and this one takes it to a whole new level with just how expansive this world is. I love how creative these movies are, and they really create such an interesting crime underworld. That's one of the most interesting to see. And yeah, I just really like what they do with that, like with John Wick's background with the Russians and all that stuff going on, and all the rules of like combat and like fighting to the death and stuff, and how all these people sort of have a code, but also sort of don't, depending on the person. It's really interesting, and really cool to watch. Yeah, I really liked Bill Skarsgård. He was great in this. A very fun villain. Someone I wanted to shout out was Rina Sawayama as Akira. She's actually a musician, a good musician at that. I really like her music, but she's really good in this movie. I was really pleasantly surprised, and she does very well with her action sequences. I've heard that rumors that they might make a spin-off movie with her, which I'd be very open to. I think it would be cool to see her as the main character, and I think she was very convincing in this. Donnie Yen was great. It's sort of interesting that he plays a blind character again, like he did in Rogue One.
Yeah.
And yeah, I found it so interesting, the relationship between him and John Wick, where they're both sort of honorable things, essentially. Like they both follow the codes, but they have to be enemies, essentially. Like in another time, and the movie even establishes that they used to be friends, but because of what's happened, they have to go against each other now. The ending of this movie is really good. Like, there's just this breathless climax that happens that is so wild, and it almost becomes darkly funny, like John Wick having to go up this great staircase and falling over and over and over again. And since this movie is obviously not very well steeped in reality, if it was, he would be dead at that moment because of the amount of stairs he falls down. Like, something would be broken, at the very least. Many things would be. But because of the world this movie is in, it works that he just, as for comedic effect, that he keeps on falling down the stairs. Yeah. And keeps on having to fight more and more and more people. And then the showdown happens and the payoff is awesome. Now, I've heard rumors that there will be potentially a Chapter 5. I don't know how I feel about that with how this one ended, but you know what? Each of these movies has been good, so I'm open to it. Maybe it'll be like the Scream franchise where every movie generally works, so who knows? Yeah. I would be very curious to see what they do considering how this movie ended.
Yeah. My number 4 is a movie I feel like was made so specifically for me that it's like so weird. This is Skinnamarink. I I don't know what it is about this movie that drew me to it so much. It's probably the weirdness because if anyone, most of the people on this channel come here for the short films, and if anyone's watched my short films, you can see why I would love a movie like Skinnamarink so much. I love the weirdness. I love the vibe. One of the things, the highlights of this movie that adds to its creepiness, and I'll just sort of tack on to what James said because he covered a lot of what I would have said or was going to say. This movie has like the kids talk in this whisper, and it's always so weird because like no movie has ever done this where like the dialogue is all in a whisper, and there's like there's hardly any dialogue, and somehow the movie keeps this pace that like keeps you on your toes and interested without any music hardly, without any dialogue hardly. And yet somehow it works, and it works to an exceptionally effective degree. Lots of really cool shots. One shot that always comes to my mind is the upside down cutlery and toys and stuff on that.
Yeah.
That part was really cool. A lot of really cool imagery, and like obviously just like the best way I described this movie was that it's a curl up in a ball and cringe type of horror. Like it is, there are some parts that will generally make you like turn around and be like, oh boy. It's just a classic scary movie done with a real unique way, and I hope to see him do a lot more horror because I think he absolutely knocked that one out of the park.
Okay. At number 4 for me is Godzilla -1. Now, I'll be honest, I did not expect this movie to hit my top 10 at all. I saw it was getting good ratings, but personally, most of the Godzilla movies have not really resonated for me on any deeper level besides being fun action movies. And that's fine. I'm fine with a Godzilla movie being like that, but man, this one, it's just on another level. I mean, there's a reason this movie is being so loved by both critics and audiences. It just works on practically every level possible. This one combines the best of what the other Godzilla movies do. It actually makes compelling human characters, like you care about the human characters' journeys, but it also makes Godzilla a legitimately terrifying presence, and it shows him enough that you're like not wondering where he is. It doesn't do either side excessively. It tells the story very well, and it is very balanced. And I think it's very fitting to sort of put Godzilla in a post-war scenario, a sort of representative of what Godzilla has sort of been to Japan for ever since they were created. So he fits very well in the setting, obviously. And yeah, I mean, there's so much to love about this movie. I really think the best thing about it is how it pretty much flawlessly establishes its thematic arc of like finding hope in destruction, and it does it without ever cheapening it. Like the whole idea of the movie is like no one deserves to die in war, and there's nothing necessarily honorable about dying in war, especially if you don't have to. Is the interesting thing. Like the main character is a suicide bomber, and it's looked at as dishonorable that he abandoned his post, essentially, in cowardice. But it's sort of established later on that, like, it wasn't right of Japan to expect people to do that, like, to put human lives on the line as just, like, shields, and that there's not honor and sacrifice necessarily. But at the same time, the character's arc is, like, he finds it within himself why it might be necessary for him to do so. Like, he'd be willing to do so, but it's of his own volition, not forced by anyone else. And even when he does decide to sacrifice himself, he's not really doing it, and a pretty cool plot twist that really works very well. I love the relationship between him and his name is Koichi, and this woman, Noriko, that he's is that it? Is it Noriko?
Noriko, yeah.
Noriko. Okay, I wasn't sure if I was saying the right character, but the relationship the two forge is really well done because it's slowly developed over the movie, and you're really convinced of it by the end because they're raising this child together, even though neither of them are her parents. And you're really, I love this relationship. It felt so real, and man, and the ending. It is so good. Like, the ending sold this movie for me more than anything else. The fight with Godzilla, the final fight, is awesome. Just all the humans combining their ingenuity together to create a really cool scenario where they defeat Godzilla, and then the final reveal that could have been a fake out in a worse movie, but is a great emotional payoff in this one, where the question that is asked at the end of the movie is just genuinely powerful and really works well. This movie is just great, and it really surprised me.
Well, we're experiencing a little bit of deja vu because here I am saying my number 3 after your number 4. My number 3 is Godzilla -1. I live in the spectrum of where I thoroughly enjoy Godzilla as well. I think, Western Godzilla has been pretty good since 2014, I'd say. Especially King of the Monsters, and then Kong versus Godzilla was also really fun. This is Godzilla at its absolute peak. So many great action sequences. Godzilla looks incredible in this movie for the apparent low budget that it was on, barring any work conditions that the VFX artist may or may not have been put under. That's not part of my thought process of it, because Godzilla just simply looks absolutely terrifying. He has this ashen, dark look to him, and it's the way sort of Godzilla was supposed to be. And at its core, Godzilla is supposed to be a villain. James commented on, the post-war Godzilla. That's, the way the original Godzilla story went was he was made from the nuclear bombs that were dropped in Japan. And this one plays off of it really cleverly because it's an anti-war story at its heart, essentially. But they essentially have to go to war again after already being in war. They have to do it again, but they're fighting for their own survival this time. Which is it's a great plot device to have, almost like a second war, but it's against something that is far more dangerous. Really great action sequences, like James said. Performances across the board were really great. Putting it in a post-war setting where a lot of people were pretty much defenseless against this type of thing, it really makes Godzilla feel like a way more dangerous presence. And Godzilla doesn't rule the screen. Like he said, it's a very character-driven story, which is really great. But when Godzilla is on the screen, you can feel it. And oh my gosh, the theme music. I cannot tell you enough how much the theme music adds to this movie. Every time Godzilla's on screen, it just plays this incredible, I don't know if it's piano or synth or something, just this incredible theme music that, it just makes you fear Godzilla so much more. It's so good. I think this might be the first time that all my top 3s are 5 out of 5s. This was a literal perfect movie.
Okay, at number 3 for me is Killers of the Flower Moon. Martin Scorsese is a director that you can rely on to make quality, I think. I think pretty much everyone would agree with that. And this movie was pretty powerful, I thought. It makes you mad. It makes you feel sick to your stomach, but that's what it's setting out to do. Telling this story that should have never happened, that is essentially a commentary on the relations between white Americans and Native Americans, and how these Native Americans were essentially used and abused by other people, even though they were the ones on the land first. And it's a very sad story where you're seeing all this abuse happen. And just all the steps that sort of occurred to make it happen. Um, yeah, I think it's very compelling, and even though the movie is very long, I was not ever really bored in it. I was consistently compelled by what was happening and intrigued to see where the story would go next. And I think a big part of that is all the great performances in this movie.
Oscars across the board.
Yeah.
Oscars everywhere.
Yeah, Leonardo DiCaprio, he probably won't get the Oscar this year, but he was really good. He plays his character well, and it's really interesting to watch him just become this very despicable person, and all the choices he makes actively makes that make him even worse. But I can see why Martin Scorsese chose to make him the main character. It makes sense for the purpose of the movie, even though he's not a character you sympathize with at all, really. You see his motivations, you see why he's doing these things. Lily Gladstone is, of course, the heart of the movie. I think she has a good chance to get the Oscar, especially because she won a lot of the big critics awards, so she has a good chance. And I would be happy if she got it because she's great in this. And it's interesting to watch her reaction to everything. Some people were commenting that they were unhappy that she didn't do much, but it's sort of her story, you know, and at the end of the day, she was sort of powerless for a lot of it because Ernest gave her a literal disease and was actively killing her in the movie, essentially, so there wasn't much she could do. And it was just really compelling to watch her reacting to the situation and sort of bittersweet and tragic to watch her still being in love with Ernest despite all that he was doing to her. Like, she has a lot of compassion, like more than I think a lot of people would in this scenario. But she plays her character really well. And then Robert De Niro, I mean, Scorsese's protege, essentially, these two have worked together for ages. He plays his character well. His character is horrible. But it's interesting to watch this character consistently justify themselves, and it's fascinating how they think that they're still a friend of the Osage, even despite all the horrible actions they take.
Uncle.
Jesse Plemons kills it here. It's actually sort of cool to see him not play a bad guy for once. But he still is a menace in the movie, nevertheless. And I always like seeing him in movies. He always brings a cool presence to everything. I think the movie is well directed. It might run a little long, and I do think the ending is a little bizarre, but that's sort of the case for a lot of Scorsese movies. That's sort of par for the course. And there's other Scorsese movies I like better than this. I think Shutter Island is better. I think Wolf of Wall Street is better. But this is still a really good movie and still shows Scorsese just being a great director.
Okay, I'm going to lay it out here. This is the closest number 2 and number 1 film I think I've ever had in the history of as long as I've been watching movies. This is the hardest pick for number 2 and number 1 ever. I was going back and forth all the time, just thinking about what I loved about each of these movies. My number 2 will easily reveal what my number 1 is, but that's just the way it is based on the movies that released this year. My number 2 movie for this year was Across the Spider-Verse.
Mine as well, which I think means we have the same number 1.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, my number 1 was The Flash.
Yeah.
Shout out. Anyway, no. Listen, Across the Spider-Verse, this movie starts out showing off, and it's just this unbelievable level of animation. I don't know who these bozos at Sony Pictures Animations think they are, but these guys make other animations look amateur. Maybe not amateur, but my gosh, the amount of quality and depth and layer to their animations is unreal. Starts out with a really cool sequence from Gwen Stacy, another excellent voice performance from Haley Steinfeld too. And it's Across the Spider-Verse is kind of half her story. It's a kind of half and half story, which is really interesting. And her character gets a lot more of a spotlight. We get to see her relationship with her father, and stuff like that, which is really cool. Gives a lot more context and depth to her character. And and that beginning drumming sequence is just so freaking sick. And obviously once we get to see Miles, Shamik Moore is just a unbelievable talent as Miles Morales, and he gets a lot of continuing cool moments with his dad, you know, continuing off of where the plot events of the first one got us to. And the supporting cast was really cool. Jason Schwartzman was great as the Spot. The Spot was a really fun, interesting villain. Also had some really he's a very interesting villain. No, Spot has not really been explored in Spider-Man media at all aside from the comics. So a really cool idea for a villain. Has a lot of fun with animation wise with what he does. A lot of really cool animation moments, especially, you know, the scene in the shop that I always think of, that, and just a really sick fight sequence that uses a lot of Spot's powers to amplify the fight. Great supporting cast across the board. Oscar Isaac as Spider-Man 2099. That was such a sick character to have. Daniel Kaluuya as Spider-Punk, you know, all that other stuff. The supporting cast was awesome. Seeing all the different Spider-Men. If you want a literal multiverse that works, this is the multiverse that works the best. Because the Spider-Verse, seeing all those different Spider-Men in like the big spider lab or whatever, it was so cool. And obviously you got to shout out the Lego Spider-Man sequence.
Yes,
That was so cool, and learning that like a 14-year-old did it and got like insanely you know, just so cool. And like this movie just did so many unique things. It just drops the biggest cliffhanger in movie history on you, and it's just so annoying to know that the next one probably won't be out for another 4 years.
Yeah.
But my gosh, this is one of those movies you're gonna have on repeat forever. I loved this franchise.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything said there. If Marvel needs to look at how to do a multiverse movie from this one, because this one does it very well. It manages to make the multiverse interesting while still focusing on the main characters that it's supposed to be focusing on. And it makes the character's arc around the multiverse actually very interesting. Like, talking about, it sort of goes meta with talking about the idea of canon events, and it sort of pokes fun at fans for caring so much about them. And the idea that it doesn't really, I mean, everyone's story is their own, and it plays into it sort of furthers the idea that the first movie had of like anyone can wear the Spider-Man mask even further. It takes an even bolder step, in my opinion, because Miles Morales' character, essentially, his father is supposed to die in his world, but he decides, no, I don't want that to happen. And it's very interesting the way they sort of show that is actually something to be rooting for him to do. And yeah, I mean, animation-wise, just stellar. One of the best animated things I have ever seen. So many impressive sequences in here, and it still very much so adheres to the comic book style that makes this movie series feel so distinct. Yeah, so many great voice performances. I can't wait to see what they do with the Spot in part 2, because he was so cool here. This is still, in my opinion, the best Peter Parker we have. I love the Peter Parker in this series, and what they do with him, making him more of a family man in this one, was pretty cool, with his daughter and everything. I think they just have a lot of fun playing around with his
freaking
character.
hilarious, dude.
Yeah.
I love him.
And even them bringing in like live action Spider-Man stuff, it doesn't feel awkward. It feels very well incorporated and not something that they're forcing. Yeah, I still think it's hard to say. I think I like the first Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse ever so slightly better, but it's so hard to say, because this one is just puts amps everything up, and it works very well.
I mean, they're both 5 out of 5s for me, so it's just a matter of like personal preference.
Yeah.
I prefer the way this one does things a little bit more, but yeah, they're both interstellarly good movies.
Yeah, and to be fair, we don't have the full picture of this one yet.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. This is technically a part 1 out of 2, and then part 2 out of 3. So you know the way it is. And then we both know what our number 1 movie is. It's going to be Oppenheimer.
Good old Oppenheimer.
I don't think anyone needs to say anything more about Christopher Nolan other than how much of a legendary impact he's had on the film space. Oppenheimer was one that, you know, you just see a trailer with Christopher Nolan's name on it, and you just know it's going to be a guaranteed top 3 at least.
Unless it's Tenet.
Unless it's Tenet. Well, even the Tenet trailer was good, but the movie ended up being very different. But I digress. This is definitely my top 5 Nolan movies, if not top 3 for posterity's sake.
Top 3 for me.
Listen, this can sometimes be an extremely difficult movie to watch. It tackles some very tough subjects, but it's told in this is a Nolan movie through and through. The storytelling is exactly what you'd expect from Nolan. It messes around with time. It flips around from different perspectives at different times, but it uses a lot of really cool camera tricks to sort of guide you into what's happening. There's one part in the present, there's one part in the future after everything's happened, and then there's one part sort of where things are actively happening. So there's black and white parts where, you know, there's the hearings in the court, and then there's certain parts that are in the time where the atomic bomb is being created, and then there's certain parts where Oppenheimer is actually being interviewed and all of Oppenheimer's constituents, stuff like that. It's a very, very cool structure. And my Lord, Cillian Murphy absolutely knocked it out of the park. Mm-hmm. He is so good in this movie. I don't think I fully appreciate how good this is, without a doubt, his best performance ever, and I'm glad he was really given a chance to have a lead role. I know he's had a couple, but this is by and large his best performance without any competition, I think. A lot of really, really good supporting roles too, you know, across the board. Robert Downey Jr., just a great performance from him. Everyone was great. And the movie just has some really bone-chilling moments. I think we can both visualize the moment we both had our mouths open at. Just for the sake of this movie, please go see it.
Yeah. Every
single moment in this movie is just like god tier filmmaking. Incredible visual metaphors, incredible like usage of lighting, pretty much majority practical effects. And yeah, I mean, I cannot say enough about how much this movie impacted me this year. Like, and we saw it in IMAX, which is like probably, you know, it's obviously the run ended, but that was the ideal way to see it. That was absolutely incredible.
All right. Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, to me, I think the only two Nolan movies that could possibly beat this one out is The Dark Knight, which is my favorite movie of all time, so that one will probably never win, and perhaps The Prestige, but you know, this one's in pretty close competition with that one, I will say. And yeah, I mean, this movie is excellent. I think it's one of the most uniquely done biopics. I think that's why it works so well. Like, you see so many biopics that tell their story in such a standard way, but this one tells it in such an interesting fashion that you're endlessly compelled. Like, it gives Oppenheimer an interesting story, and it makes him just feel like a very real character. It doesn't idolize him. It just tells the story as it is, and it tells it very realistically. Like, but I mean, it explores his guilt more than anything else about his journey to building this bomb and the ramifications he saw afterwards. And yeah, Murphy's performance is great. Just the haunted look he has at the end of the movie has stayed with me all year long. He doesn't say a word, and you know exactly what's going through his brain. It is bar none the best moment of any movie I saw this year. Just so chilling. Um, and yeah, the way Nolan plays with time, as he always does, but he plays with it very well in this movie. This might be my favorite way he's manipulated time because he does it very seamlessly. And yeah, it's just he's such a when Christopher Nolan is doing well, he is firing on all cylinders. All the performances in this are great. I really liked Matt Damon as Leslie Groves. I thought he was really cool, and the way they developed him was really interesting. And he doesn't go in the way that I was expecting him to, I will say that. But I really liked what they did with him. It's nice to see Robert Downey Jr. in a role where he gets to flex his acting muscles a little more. As much as I liked him in Iron Man, I just knew that wasn't all he was capable of. I knew he could do so much more, and he proves that here. I just love what he plays his character so well with how petty he is about everything, but the way his character goes is awesome. Florence Pugh is always knocking it out of the park. One of the best modern actresses working today. She's not even in the movie that much, but she still leaves an impact. Emily Blunt's big scene in here is incredible. She's so great. Rami Malek has an awesome moment in here that you're not expecting from him. Kenneth Branagh is awesome in this. And Alden Ehrenreich, he was maybe my biggest surprise in the movie of all. I really loved what he did as Robert Downey Jr.'s aide in the movie, and it was I just sort of liked where his character went, and he was in another movie this year that was really good. I think this guy is very talented, and I can't wait to see what he does in the future. But I mean, this was a flawless 5 out of 5, and yeah, one of Nolan's best, bar none.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so overall, great year for movies. We're gonna sign off here. Another critical podcast in the books. Hope you all enjoyed this one. Let us know your favorite movies in the comments below of this year, or maybe in general. I don't know. Up to you. Anyways, you all have a good one. Hope you all enjoy your holidays, and this will be posted around New Year's time, so it'll be the new year the day after you see one of these, just depending on how it goes. Appreciate you all. Peace.